Hello viewers, thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. Unfortunately, I have some news to share with you all that is rather disappointing to myself and probably to many of you. Not all of this is breaking news. This story actually came out last week, but I've been waiting, talking to a few people to make my own video on it. So I've been updating people on the case of Norfolk gunsmith Rodger Kotanko and his death in November at the hands of the Toronto police, who had come out to Norfolk and wanted to execute a search warrant and ended up shooting him 4 times. So the SIU had been doing an internal investigation on the Toronto police officers because too many people in the local area and even outside of Norfolk, it appeared to be a very confusing case where Toronto cops came down to Norfolk and on the surface looked like they just executed a man. So the SIU investigation has been concluded, and the investigation has concluded that there has been no wrongdoing on the part of Toronto police officers. So no charges are going to be laid, and no Toronto police officers are going to be getting in any kind of legal trouble for wrongdoings in this case, which confuses everybody. I think that in the public that's been waiting to hear what the conclusion of this is, but it is their story. Now, I have printed off from their website the SIU's investigation. I've gone through it. It's kind of lengthy, but I looked over all the details, and it confuses me, and it raises more questions than it answers in many ways. Also, our local news has been reporting on this, and there's some interesting details in the paper that I also think are interesting that weren't mentioned in the SIU report. So basically what happened, according to this report, is 2 separate handguns were retrieved from crimes in outside of Norfolk County, one in the GTA and one in North Bay incident. And these 2 guns were traced back to the last legal owner being Rodger Kotanko. So Kotanko, pardon me. I apologize for mispronouncing that name sometimes, Kotanko. So they obtained a search warrant, the Toronto police, and then they went down to Norfolk to execute the warrant, and it ended up with Kotanko being shot 4 times and being killed. So the Toronto police arrived. They notified the OPP but not the local police, and then they executed the search warrant, which had them apprehend Kotanko's wife and restrain her, while they then went to the shed where Kotanko works, and Kotanko was with a new customer that had made an appointment the night before to see him. And while that was happening, the Toronto police surrounded the shed and went in with their guns drawn, and he was shot. And now they're saying that the official story is that the mystery customer, because the identity of the customer is unknown, put his hands up when the cops entered with their guns drawn and said, "Put your hands up." And they're saying Kotanko didn't put his hands up, and that he was holding a partially constructed firearm that the customer had presented with him to work on. It was not a working firearm, but they're saying that he, instead of complying with them, pointed the gun at them, and so they were forced to fatally shoot him. That's the official story, and that's what's going down in the books, and the SIU has concluded that that's what happened. And so for the time being, that's the end of the story, except in terms of a lawsuit. There's a civil lawsuit pending. The family has launched a $23 million civil lawsuit against the Toronto Police Department. I hope that they get every cent out of that personally, because at a very minimum, it seems that that they botched the execution of the raid. Now, as I said, I went through the SIU report, and some things don't make any sense to me in it. Many things don't. And also, I find it interesting that the family and the family's lawyer don't know the identity of the mystery customer that witnessed the shooting. They say that he fears for his life because the police know where he lives and he's gone into hiding. So that's interesting. I also speculate personally that perhaps that person was an undercover cop. However, the SIU report identifies him as not as a civilian. So I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. Perhaps if it were an undercover agent, if that agent is still part of an ongoing investigation, they don't have to reveal that he's an agent and could just identify him as a civilian. I'm not sure how that works, but officially in the report, it's as far as we know, and there's no evidence to contradict this officially, it was just a civilian who has not been identified and who's now in hiding that witnessed this. The reason that this is confusing everyone, of course, is that people can't figure out on a motive or why Kotanko would make the mistakes that he made that allowed the gun to be transferred. Meaning, he already had a business and he had customers and he was well known and he had a thriving business working on people's guns legally. It's unknown why he would then sell guns on the black market, as the Toronto Police Department was speculating he did. There's no motive for that because he already had a thriving legal business. Why do that? Second of all, he was very good at what he did. So if he were going to do that, which there's no motive for him doing that, he would have known how to remove the serial numbers correctly from the guns, and the guns wouldn't have been able to be traced back to him so easily. So those things don't hold up. Another thing that doesn't hold up, that's mentioned in the papers report but not mentioned in the SIU report, is that out of the 4 shots that hit Kotanko, 1 was in the head. He was shot in both hands. That implies that he might have been in a defensive position when he was shot. It'd be hard to imagine him holding a gun and pointing it and then still getting shot in both hands if only 4 shots were fired at him. And then, of course, it doesn't explain why he would resist arrest and point a firearm that didn't work at cops that were pointing guns at him, because if we're to believe the SIU official report, that would seem like suicidal behavior, and it fails to answer any of the mysterious questions. Also, it also shows that I think that hopefully the civil lawsuit will bring some money to the family, because it shows that these Toronto police they're unable to execute a search warrant and apprehend a 70-year-old man because of these problems. So on that note, I would say it doesn't look good for the Toronto police. Also, in the SIU report, it does make this clear, which confuses me. In the analysis and director's decision at the end, it says the director of the SIU wrote this: "I am further satisfied that the FEU officers, including the SO subject officer, comported themselves reasonably in the execution of the warrant. In order to ensure there was no confusion as to what they were doing outside their home jurisdiction, they had contacted the OPP to inform them of their intentions. The team had decided on a soft entry," this is important, soft entry, "as opposed to a hard entry or dynamic entry, wherein officers would knock on the door to ask to speak to the complainant before conducting their search, properly taking into account the complainant's age and the absence of any documented violence in his past." So he was 70 years old, he has no history of violence, and even his own family had acknowledged before this came out in the previous months that he moved like a sloth. Very old, slow man, so without a history of violence. So they decided on a soft entry, and yet they still entered the shed with their guns drawn, which by definition doesn't sound like a soft entry. This is precisely what they did, first in respect to the complainant's wife by the front of the home, and then in relation to the complainant, in respect to whom the evidence indicates that the subject officer and witness officer approached the workshop announcing their status as police with a search warrant. It is true that the subject officer and witness officer entered the workshop with their guns drawn and immediately asked the complainant and the civilian witness to raise their hands, but these would appear to have been reasonable precautions in the circumstance. They were, after all, investigating a serious criminal offense and had reason to believe that there would likely be firearms in the workshop. The complainant was a gunsmith. So even in this report here by the SIU, I find it to be full of contradictions, because they decided on a soft entry, but then still entered with guns drawn, even though they knew he was an old, slow man without a history of violence. And then they're saying upon doing that with their guns drawn and pointed at them, he refused to comply by putting his hands up and then pointed a gun at them that didn't work, was not a functioning gun, and was therefore shot, and somehow in both hands. So I think personally, on the surface, in my own opinion, this doesn't seem to add up a lot, and it seemed it is what it is. Legally, this is the findings of the SIU, and they've decided that there's no criminal wrongdoing on the part of the Toronto police. So those are the facts. My personal opinion and speculation on this is that it seems quite heavily like the SIU is trying to protect the cops. The person who actually pulled the trigger, the officer who pulled the trigger, he refused to hand over his notes or comply with the SIU investigation. So most of this was based on talking to other officers. That's also sketchy, that the officer who pulled the trigger wouldn't cooperate. So these things, nothing adds up here, and as far as I'm concerned, there are still more questions now than there were before. Another thing that is interesting to note, and this is in the newspaper, The family's lawyer, Smidiach, said Toronto police confirmed to him the day he filed the lawsuit on behalf of the Kotanko family in mid-January that they confiscated more than $20,000 in cash from Kotanko's workshop after he died. Smidiach said that the money was derived from the sale of legal firearms at a public auction. So even after these cops went in with their guns drawn, ended up shooting him 4 times and killing him because he wouldn't apparently put his hands up, they still left and took $20,000 out of his workshop, which he had apparently got from selling or from an auction. So the fact that they took that 20 grand cash is also very, very interesting. So yeah, none of this makes sense to me because I don't understand why the civilian witness and the officer who pulled the trigger can't be identified. I don't understand why there'd be a motive for Kotanko to sell weapons on the black market, or why he would do it so in such a way that he would easily get caught. I don't understand why they couldn't apprehend him safely, or why they executed a soft entry with guns drawn, or why he would basically act in a way that would get himself shot, just right off the bat like that. So, disappointing for me to report that that's what the SIU has concluded. I personally suspected that might happen, though. The cops tend to look after their own. I've gone through the SIU investigation official report. Like I said, it doesn't seem to add up to me because of the soft entry, and a few other things are interesting. You can get this on their website if you want to look into it more for yourself. But those are some things I think that are worth considering. And at this point, the family is still on pushing their lawsuit against the Toronto Police Department for $23 million. At this point, I will update the story again if there's something to update. So if a decision is made in that lawsuit, I'll let you guys know. But for the time being, that is the findings of the SIU. That's their logic. And this has been a bit of my commentary on why I think that it's all BS. In reality, we're probably not going to know what happened here. But to me, it seems, extremely sketchy and unfortunate. My heart goes out to the Kotanko family, and that it is what it is. So thanks for watching this Freebird Media News Update, and I'll see you guys again soon. Thanks.